Do you think that an effective integrated commission will do enough to restore trust in Australian democracy and Australian political institution? And what more can we do beyond an anti-corruption watchdog to begin restoring this trust in our political system?
Alan Jones.
Well, Stan, the Integrity Commission, of course, is a government commitment at the election, so I think we all have to accept that that is going to come into place. But at the same time, I think we've got to realise that it's about 300 pages long and the explanatory memorandum is 500 pages. Now, politicians are not known for reading stuff, and I'm not too sure how many people have read any of this, but there are three aspects of it that do concern me. The retrospectivity is a very big issue. Now, the Liberal Party DNA is opposed to retrospectivity, so I would be surprised if the Liberal Party, although Dutton has said he's supporting this, but retrospectivity is something we ought to be very concerned about. How far back do you go? None of that has been explained. The other thing is that a commission inquiry can begin without any reference from anybody. So whoever these people might be, they can just institute and initiate an inquiry without any reference and without any evidence at all of criminal conduct. Now, that ought to be some concern, I think. I don't agree with Jacqui on this business that everything has to be in the public place. There are 128 authorised names in New South Wales who have been defamed and who've had reputational damage as a result of ICAC when in fact they were innocent. I mean, Margaret Cunneen is classic, of course. She had to go to the High Court to disprove charges made against her in ICAC. Murray Keir fortunately could afford to go to court. He was found guilty by ICAC. The magistrate completely dismissed and dismantled the ICAC findings. Now, Dreyfus seems to be saying that reputational damage may be taken into consideration. Now, the law has been changed in New South Wales where 3 commissioners have to give appropriate evidence that reputational damage is not likely to occur if an inquiry publicly is to take place into a particular individual. Now, Mark Dreyfus seems to be saying that you may take into consideration the prospect of reputational damage. Now, we've seen some appalling instances of this in New South Wales, and the classic case is Berejiklian. I mean, her whole private life was thrown into the public place. That matter could have been all determined. There are international bodies who do it entirely differently. They go in camera, they go in, not in public, to determine whether there is appropriate evidence for charges to be levelled. When that determination has been reached, that the evidence justifies going public, then you go into the public arena and the person is named. So I think this needs comprehensive debate. And Ed, I see your party is saying you want it all over by November 21. That's 8 weeks away. I mean, it's all going to be resolved and cleaned out. Something as important as this, with that amount of legislation and documentation, should be given more than 8 weeks for appropriate public discussion.
Ben.
We're on Gadigal, Stan, unceded, so I recognise, that relationship with the living lands, waters and skies. I'll clarify as well, I was on Gadigal country in my formative years where I learnt not to shy away from looking white supremacy in the eye, and that is the reason why I came here tonight. On integrity and trust, and that juxtaposed with a political system that was forced into place under the guise of fiction, and think that those two things can marry up and coexist is unbelievable. So on the Integrity Commission, I'd love to know how retrospective it can be, because if you really want to look back retrospectively, you will realise that this system of government has no integrity and it cannot be trusted.
Bella, you've raised questions about trust of politicians, haven't you? Why don't you trust politicians?
What we saw last week, Scott Morrison and all that, he kept on changing his statement all the time. So we didn't know whether to believe him or not, what he said in the first place. So that's one of the reasons, you know. And sometimes they don't follow what they say. They don't continue with what they are saying. They say, do this, but they do exactly opposite of what we are told to do.
So you're concerned about what Jacqui has raised about the privacy?
Yeah.
And the fact that people don't know necessarily what's happening here?
Yeah.
Alan talked about how many numbers, how many pages there are in all of this that you will never know.
Yeah. But then, you know, sometimes this integrity, that ICAC, like former New South Wales Premier, her whole career was ruined because of private life was brought into public, and then at the end of the day, it didn't matter much to general public like us.
I think you raise really, really valid points, and that is why it's so important to get this right, because it's not just going to be for the next 3 years for the Labor Party. Once this body is set up, it is going to be forevermore, ensuring that serious and systemic corruption is not occurring at a federal level, and that's something we all need to be confident in. I think in terms of trust with politicians, we need to be a lot more connected to our communities. I think we saw those candidates that were successfully connected to their communities, the National Party candidates out in the regions, very connected. A lot of the new independents, very connected with their local community. So I think Australians are wanting to know who their politician is, to be able to have that conversation in the coffee shop, ask, you know, be a lot more sort of engaged with the parliamentary process more broadly. And I think that honest conversation and holding each other to account as community members do will go a long way in restoring trust.
And I don't think we should allow the debate to create in the public mind the notion that politicians are dishonest. I think that would be a very unfortunate point to reach. I think the bulk of politicians try to do the right thing, and I think that they're most probably their integrity is beyond reproach. I think we're talking here about processes which actually lead to activities which are corrupt. But at the end of the day, we've got to learn to have faith in our politicians. Obviously, they've got to be put under the microscope, and if this allows that to happen, that's fine. But the notion of retrospectivity, I mean, how far back do we go? And to be able to pursue a case against someone without any evidence of criminality and without any reference from anybody, I think we're getting into fairly dangerous territory here.
I have to say, I think you find the retrospectivity goes back 10 years. That's the first thing. Second thing is... I've lost my train of thought there.
That's not like you.
I apologise, I know.
Jack, I think it needs to go back to 1901, because if this is going to be independent and if this is not going to be a politicised body or able to be politicised, then it does need to go back to the beginning.
I think after the last 9 years of the coalition government, it needs to go back 10 years. Well, I'm sorry, it needs to go back. And the other thing is, it is up to the Commission. It doesn't matter what we say here or anything else. If they believe there is enough evidence to start procedures against somebody or a body, then that is up to them. That is what they're paid for. They are well and truly trained in that area, and I look very forward to seeing where it goes from here.
And there's your point. So you were very quick to say I was wrong earlier, but the point is the way the legislation's framed, Jacqui, is that the exceptional circumstances test, that will be set up by the Commission to determine what goes public, what doesn't.
What is an exceptional circumstance?
And
it's yet to be defined.
Hang on a second. And every time I'm with you, you always jump all over me. I don't know what it is that I say.
You always hurt the ones you love, don't you, mate?
Yeah, that's true too. So if you look at, ICAC's one of the most, the New South Wales one is one of the most powerful ones in the country. How many public hearings does it hold? 5%. Makes the call. So they will make the call as to what ones go public, what ones don't. And if we want something to be independent, we can't tell them how they should run in terms of making those calls. They will make that call. So, in terms of how far back it goes, I mean, I think you need to be serious in respect of, you can't go 1901. But I
only operate within the
also understand too,
Ed.
there will be other views as well. But the reality is, this, in particular, I think context is important. You look at the last term of Parliament, everything where you wanted to find out information, it was very, very hard to get. Question time turned into a joke. Parliament shut down all the time. Estimates didn't run, and that should be the forum to get information. Questions on notice, which is supposed to be a powerful tool to be able to get information out of departments, gone. So having something like this is important to be able to scrutinise the way that decisions are made, the way if someone's acted improperly, and in particular corruptly, and we've put that stuff in place. And Alan, can I just say, you said, that 8 weeks isn't enough. Mate, people have been waiting for this thing for years. 2 terms went before we even got to this point where we could seriously consider the legislation,
How many
I think the
parliamentarians are going
appetite is
to read
there.
300 pages? I'm telling you.
The other thing is, if someone believes that they're innocent, that I don't believe that they get a second right or a review to go and say, before you put me out in the public arena, I need you to listen to me. And I do not believe, unless I'm getting that 300 pages wrong, that there is a review process in for them to have a second shot. And I think that's a little unfair.
Before we move on, Ben, exceptional circumstances. What are some exceptional circumstances that would come to your mind that should be investigated?
Well, from my vantage point in Darwin, looking back on the world of Canberra and the decisions that are being made there, I think about the Northern Territory intervention that was rolled out, a renewed suite of race-based laws to attack and undermine the sovereignty of Indigenous people. I know that, secrecy is synonymous with corruption, and for Auntie over here, who's done more laps around the sun than I have, you've seen this cycle come and go time and time again. There's a previous Liberal government that, I don't know, I didn't bring my shopping list tonight, but it does cover both sides of Parliament, both major parties that are bought and sold, that have the interests of themselves and the people that are funding them over the broader populace, which is the Australian community.